Canine dog attacks, fellow officer during arrest. What that cop was carrying changed everything. What happened on that quiet Tuesday afternoon will shock you to your core. A police dog turned on his own handler in the middle of an arrest, and the reason why will leave you speechless. If you're listening from anywhere around the world, drop a comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible true stories. The story you're about to listen to started on Maple Street in Durham, North Carolina, where everything seemed perfectly normal until it wasn't. Officer Ryan Mitchell adjusted his bulletproof vest as he stepped out of the patrol car, the afternoon sun beating down on the quiet residential neighborhood. His canine partner, Storm, a massive German shepherd with intelligent brown eyes, jumped down beside him with practiced ease. The dog's ears were already perked up, scanning the surroundings with the focus that had made him one of the department's most reliable narcotics detection dogs. "Easy, boy," Ryan whispered, running his hand along Storm's neck. They had been partners for 3 years now, and Ryan trusted this dog more than most humans he knew. Storm had never let him down, not once. Officer Sarah Chen, fresh out of the academy with barely 6 months on the force, walked up behind them. Her hand rested nervously on her radio as she looked at the small blue house they were about to approach. The paint was peeling and the front yard was overgrown with weeds, but it looked harmless enough. "Target is Marcus Williams," Ryan said quietly, checking his notes. "Wanted on drug trafficking charges. Should be straightforward." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. This was only her 4th arrest with the Canine unit, and she still felt like she was learning something new every day. Ryan had been patient with her, teaching her the ropes without making her feel stupid for asking questions. They moved toward the front door in formation, Storm walking perfectly beside Ryan's left leg. The dog's nose twitched slightly, but he remained calm and focused. Ryan knocked on the door with authority. "Police, Marcus Williams, we have a warrant for your arrest." The door opened after a few seconds, revealing a thin man in his 30s, wearing a stained white t-shirt and jeans. His eyes darted between the officers nervously. "I'm Marcus," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "What's this about?" "You know what this is about," Ryan replied firmly. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Marcus complied without resistance, allowing Sarah to handcuff him, while Ryan kept Storm at his side. Everything was going exactly as planned. Storm remained perfectly still, his training evident in every controlled movement. But then something changed. As Sarah finished securing the handcuffs, Storm's ears suddenly shot up. His body went rigid, and a low growl started deep in his throat. Ryan looked down at his partner, confused. The dog's eyes weren't focused on Marcus anymore. They were locked on Ryan himself. "Storm, what's wrong, boy?" Ryan asked, genuine concern in his voice. The growl grew louder. Storm's lips pulled back, revealing his teeth. Sarah stepped back instinctively, her hand moving to her weapon. "Ryan, what's happening?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. Before Ryan could answer, Storm lunged, but he didn't attack Marcus, the suspect they had just arrested. Instead, the powerful dog launched himself directly at Ryan, his jaws clamping down on the right side of Ryan's tactical vest with bone-crushing force. "Storm, no!" Ryan shouted, stumbling backward as the dog's weight hit him. "Off! Off!" But Storm wouldn't let go. His training, his years of obedience, his unwavering loyalty to Ryan, it all seemed to disappear in that moment. The dog shook his head violently, trying to tear through the thick material of the vest. Sarah drew her weapon, her hands shaking. "Should I shoot him?" "No," Ryan gasped, trying to stay on his feet as Storm continued his attack. "Don't shoot him!" Marcus stood frozen, still handcuffed, watching the chaos unfold with wide eyes. He had expected to be arrested, maybe roughed up a little, but nothing like this. Storm's powerful jaws found purchase on something beneath Ryan's vest. The dog pulled and tugged with desperate intensity, as if his life depended on getting to whatever Ryan was carrying. His claws scraped against the Kevlar, leaving deep scratches in the material. "Get him off me!" Ryan yelled, panic creeping into his voice for the first time. He tried to grab Storm's collar, but the dog was too strong, too determined. Sarah holstered her weapon and rushed forward, trying to help without getting bitten herself. She grabbed Storm's back legs, trying to pull him away from Ryan, but the dog's grip was like a steel trap. "Storm, please!" Ryan's voice cracked. This was his partner, his best friend. They had been through everything together. Why was this happening? The dog's teeth finally found what they were looking for. With a sharp tearing sound, a small object fell from inside Ryan's vest onto the concrete sidewalk. Storm immediately released his grip and stepped back, panting heavily but no longer aggressive. All three humans stared at the object on the ground. It was small, pink, and utterly out of place in this scene of chaos and confusion. A child's shoe, tiny, with little cartoon flowers on the side, and a Velcro strap that had once been white, but was now stained with something dark. Sarah knelt down slowly, her eyes never leaving the shoe. "Ryan," she said quietly, "what is this?" Ryan's face had gone completely white. He looked at the shoe, then at Storm, then back at the shoe. His hands were shaking now, and not from the dog attack. "I can explain," he whispered, but his voice was so quiet that Sarah could barely hear him. "Explain what?" Sarah's voice was getting stronger, more demanding. "Why were you carrying a child's shoe in your vest? And why did Storm attack you for it?" Marcus, still handcuffed and forgotten in the chaos, spoke up for the first time. "Man, that's messed up. Even I know that ain't right." Storm sat down beside the shoe, his brown eyes fixed on Ryan with an expression that seemed almost accusatory. The dog's tail wasn't wagging. He wasn't panting with the satisfaction of a job well done. Instead, he looked sad, disappointed even. Ryan reached down toward the shoe, but Storm let out a sharp bark that made him jerk his hand back. The dog had never barked at him like that before, warning him away from something. "Don't touch it," Sarah said firmly. She pulled out her radio with one hand while keeping her eyes on Ryan. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need a supervisor and evidence collection at my location immediately. We have a situation." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. "Unit 47, can you specify the nature of your situation?" Sarah looked at Ryan, who was still staring at the shoe like it might explode. She looked at Storm, who was now whimpering softly, a sound she had never heard the usually confident dog make before. She looked at Marcus, who was shaking his head in disbelief. "I'm not sure yet," she replied into the radio, "but I think we're going to need internal affairs." Ryan finally found his voice. "Sarah, you don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." "Then what is it?" she demanded. "Because right now, it looks like you've been carrying around a child's shoe, and your own canine partner just attacked you to get it away from you. Storm has never done anything like this before. Dogs don't just turn on their handlers unless something is very, very wrong." Storm whimpered again, pressing his nose close to the shoe without actually touching it. His whole body language had changed. The confident, well-trained police dog was gone, replaced by an animal that seemed to be grieving. "He's trying to tell us something," Sarah realized. "Storm is trying to tell us something about this shoe." Ryan's legs gave out, and he sat down heavily on the curb. His vest was torn, and there were teeth marks in the thick material, but he seemed oblivious to any physical pain. His eyes were fixed on Storm, and Sarah could see tears starting to form. "Storm," Ryan whispered, "I'm sorry, boy. I'm so sorry." The dog looked up at him, and for a moment, Sarah could swear she saw forgiveness in those brown eyes. But Storm didn't move from his position beside the shoe. He was guarding it now, protecting it from being taken away again. Marcus cleared his throat. Officers, are you still arresting me, or—" Sarah had almost forgotten about him. She looked at the handcuffed man, then at the shoe, then at Ryan, who was falling apart on the sidewalk. This was supposed to be a simple drug arrest. How had it turned into whatever this was? "Just sit down on the porch," she told Marcus. "Don't try to run." Surprisingly, Marcus complied. He seemed as interested in figuring out what was happening as Sarah was. Sirens could be heard in the distance now, getting closer. Sarah knew that once backup arrived, everything would change. There would be questions, reports, investigations. Ryan's career might be over, depending on what that shoe represented. But right now, in these last few minutes before the chaos of official procedure took over, she needed answers. "Ryan," she said softly, sitting down on the curb beside him, "talk to me. Whose shoe is this?" Ryan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. When he looked up at Sarah, she saw something in his expression that she had never seen before. Not just fear or guilt, but a deep soul-crushing pain that seemed to go back years. "Her name was Emma," he said quietly. "Emma Rodriguez. She was 5 years old." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Was?" Ryan nodded slowly. 3 years ago, she disappeared during a drug raid that went wrong. We were supposed to find her, supposed to bring her home safe." He looked at Storm, who was still sitting guard over the shoe. Storm was there that night. He's the one who found her hiding place. And, Sarah prompted, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. And we were told to leave her behind. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. What do you mean, leave her behind? The operation was bigger than just one missing kid, Ryan continued, his voice hollow. That's what they told us. If we took Emma, it would blow our cover and ruin months of undercover work. They said we could come back for her later, after the main arrests were made. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. But you didn't go back. We tried, Ryan said desperately. God, we tried. But by the time we got authorization to return to the location, the building was empty. Everyone was gone. Emma was gone. Storm made a soft whining sound, as if he understood every word being said. The dog's ears were drooped now, and his tail was tucked between his legs. The shoe, Sarah said. How did you get the shoe? Ryan's voice cracked. It was all that was left. Storm found it in the basement where she had been kept. He brought it to me, dropped it at my feet like he was asking me to do something about it, but I couldn't. My superiors said the case was closed, that Emma was probably moved to another city, that there was nothing more we could do. So you kept it, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. I couldn't throw it away, Ryan whispered. It was proof that she existed, that we had found her, and then we left her. I carry it with me on every case, hoping that maybe someday I'll find a lead, find something that could help me track her down. The sirens were getting louder now. Sarah could see the flashing lights at the end of the street. Their time was almost up. Ryan, she said urgently, is Emma still alive? He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. I don't know. God help me. I don't know. But Storm... He looked at his canine partner, who was still guarding the shoe with unwavering dedication. Storm never forgot her scent. He's been trying to tell me something for months now, getting agitated on certain cases, acting strange when we're near certain locations. You think he's been picking up her trail? I think he's been trying to lead me to her, and I've been too stupid to listen. Ryan reached out slowly towards Storm, and this time the dog didn't growl. Instead, Storm moved closer, allowing Ryan to scratch behind his ears. He attacked me because he's tired of watching me carry around that shoe like a memorial. He wants me to use it as evidence. He wants me to find her. The first patrol car pulled up to the curb, followed quickly by a supervisor's vehicle. Sarah watched as uniformed officers got out, their hands resting on their weapons as they took in the scene. A torn police vest, a crying officer, a vigilant canine, and a small pink shoe sitting on the sidewalk like an accusation. We're going to find her, Sarah said quietly, just for Ryan to hear. Whatever it takes, whatever we have to do, we're going to find Emma Rodriguez. Storm looked up at her when she said the name, his tail giving just the slightest wag. For the first time since the attack, the dog looked hopeful. Sergeant Martinez approached them cautiously, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the scene. He was a good cop, fair but thorough, and Sarah knew he would want the truth, no matter how complicated it might be. What happened here? Martinez asked, his voice calm but commanding. Sarah stood up, squaring her shoulders. She looked at Ryan, who was still sitting on the curb with his hand on Storm's head. She looked at Marcus, who was watching everything with fascination from the porch. She looked at the small pink shoe that had started all of this. Sergeant, she said clearly, I think we need to reopen the Emma Rodriguez case. Martinez raised an eyebrow. The missing child from 3 years ago? That case was closed. Storm doesn't think so, Sarah replied, gesturing to the canine, who was still sitting guard over the shoe. And after what just happened, neither do I. As more vehicles arrived and the street began to fill with law enforcement personnel, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Storm had been trying to tell them something for months, maybe years. The question was, were they finally ready to listen? The afternoon sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across Maple Street. In a few hours, this would all be paperwork and official statements. But right now, there were 3 beings who knew the truth. A guilt-ridden officer, a determined rookie, and a loyal dog who had never forgotten the scent of a scared little girl. Emma Rodriguez had been missing for 3 years, but Storm's attack had just proved something that Ryan had been too afraid to hope. She might still be alive, and they might finally have a chance to bring her home. The real investigation was about to begin. 3 hours later, the Durham Police Department's conference room felt smaller than usual. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Detective Lisa Park spread crime scene photos across the long wooden table. Ryan sat in a plastic chair, his torn vest replaced with a clean uniform shirt, but his eyes still carried the weight of 3 years' worth of guilt. Storm lay at his feet, unusually quiet for a police dog who was normally alert and ready for action. Sarah paced near the window, her notebook filled with questions that seemed to multiply with every passing minute. The pink shoe sat in an evidence bag on the table, a silent witness to secrets that were finally starting to surface. "Let me get this straight," Detective Park said, adjusting her reading glasses. She was in her mid-40s, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that came from 20 years of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. "Your canine partner attacked you to get to a piece of evidence you've been carrying around for 3 years? Evidence from a case that was officially closed?" Ryan nodded slowly. "That's correct." "And you never thought to mention this to anyone? Not your supervisor, not internal affairs, not even your partner here?" Park gestured towards Sarah. "I couldn't," Ryan said quietly. "The operation that night was classified. We were told that talking about it could compromise ongoing investigations." Park leaned back in her chair, studying Ryan's face. "What operation? The Emma Rodriguez disappearance was handled by missing persons, not narcotics." Sarah stopped pacing. "Wait, what do you mean? Ryan said it was a drug raid." "That's what I was told," Ryan replied, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "We were called in as backup for a narcotics operation. Storm and I were supposed to sweep the building for drugs, but instead, we found Emma." Detective Park pulled out a thick file folder and opened it on the table. "I pulled Emma's case file after your call. According to the official report, she disappeared from her grandmother's house while playing in the backyard. There's no mention of any drug operation, no mention of police finding her at any location." The room fell silent except for the humming of the fluorescent lights. Storm lifted his head and looked around at the 3 humans, as if sensing the tension in the air. "That's impossible," Ryan said, leaning forward. "I remember everything about that night. We got the call around 11 p.m. Sergeant Williams was the one who briefed us. He said they had been watching the house for weeks, that it was connected to a major trafficking ring." "Sergeant Williams retired 2 years ago," Park said gently. "Moved to Florida, but I can try to reach him if you think it would help." Sarah sat down across from Ryan, her mind racing. "Ryan, think carefully. Who else was there that night? Who else saw Emma?" Ryan closed his eyes, trying to remember details he had spent 3 years trying to forget. "There was another officer. Martinez, I think. No, not Martinez. Martinez is here now. This was someone else. And there were federal agents too. DEA, maybe? They were the ones who told us to leave Emma behind." "Federal agents?" Park's eyebrows shot up. "That changes things significantly. If the DEA was involved, there might be records we don't have access to at the local level." Storm suddenly stood up, his ears perked toward the door. A few seconds later, there was a knock, and Sergeant Martinez entered the room. "Sorry to interrupt," Martinez said, "but we just got a call that might be relevant to your investigation." He looked directly at Sarah. "A woman called the tip line about an hour ago. She said she saw the news report about the K9 incident and wanted to report something strange she witnessed 3 years ago." Sarah's heart began to race. "What kind of strange?" Martinez consulted his notepad. "She lives on Oakwood Drive, about 6 blocks from where Emma Rodriguez disappeared. On the night Emma went missing, she says she saw a police car parked outside an abandoned house on her street around midnight. She thought it was odd because the house had been empty for months." Detective Park looked up from the case file. "Did she get a license plate number?" "No, but she said there were 2 officers and a police dog. She remembers the dog specifically because it was barking and seemed agitated." Ryan's face went pale. "Oakwood Drive. That's where we were that night. The house with the blue shutters and the broken fence." "You remember now?" Sarah asked. "It's all coming back," Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The house was supposed to be a safe house for the drug operation. But when we got inside, it was just Emma. She was chained to a pipe in the basement, scared out of her mind." Storm whimpered softly, as if he too was remembering that night. "Chained?" Detective Park's voice was sharp. "Ryan, that's not a drug operation. That's kidnapping." "I know that now," Ryan said desperately. "But we were told it was complicated, that there were bigger forces at play. The federal agents said if we took Emma right then, we'd blow months of undercover work and let the real criminals escape." Martinez frowned. "What federal agents? I've been with this department for 15 years, and I've never seen federal agents tell local police to leave a kidnapped child behind. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Ryan, what if they weren't real federal agents? What if someone was pretending to be DEA to stop you from rescuing Emma? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Ryan stared at the evidence bag containing Emma's shoe, his mind racing through possibilities he had never considered before. The badges looked real, he said slowly. The IDs looked official. They knew police procedure. They spoke like federal agents. But did you verify their credentials? Park asked. Did you call their supervisors or check with DEA headquarters? Ryan shook his head. We were told the operation was time sensitive. They said there wasn't time for standard verification procedures. Storm walked over to the evidence bag and sniffed at it gently. His tail wasn't wagging, but he wasn't showing signs of distress either. It was as if he was trying to tell them something they weren't quite understanding yet. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'm calling the DEA field office. If there really was an operation that night, they'll have records. While Sarah made her call, Detective Park continued going through Emma's case file. Ryan, I need you to tell me everything you remember about that night. Every detail, no matter how small. Ryan took a deep breath. We arrived at the house around 11:30. The front door was already open. Storm immediately picked up a scent and led me to the basement stairs. That's where we found Emma. What was her condition? Scared, obviously. She was wearing a pink dress and only one shoe. The other shoe, he gestured toward the evidence bag, that one was already off her foot, sitting on the floor next to her. Did she say anything to you? She asked if we were there to take her home. I told her yes, but then the agent showed up and said we had to wait. Park made notes as Ryan spoke. How long did you wait? Maybe 20 minutes? They were making phone calls, talking in hushed voices. Storm was getting more and more agitated. He kept trying to go back to Emma. And then what happened? Ryan's voice cracked. They told us the situation had changed. They said Emma was safer where she was for the moment, that moving her could put her in more danger. They promised they would have a social worker come get her within 24 hours. Sarah ended her phone call and walked back to the table, her face grim. The DA has no record of any operation on Oakwood Drive 3 years ago. In fact, they have no record of any DEA involvement in Durham that entire week. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan buried his face in his hands, and Storm moved closer to him, resting his head on Ryan's leg in a gesture of comfort. "Oh God," Ryan whispered. "What have I done? What have I done?" Detective Park leaned forward. "Ryan, this isn't your fault. If someone was impersonating federal agents, you had no way of knowing." "But I should have gone back," Ryan said, looking up with tears in his eyes. "Even if it meant disobeying orders, I should have gone back for her." "You tried," Sarah said firmly. "You said you tried to go back." "Not hard enough. I let bureaucracy and protocol stop me from saving a 5-year-old girl." Storm suddenly stood up and walked to the conference room door. He sat down and began to whine, looking back at the humans expectantly. "What's he doing?" Martinez asked. Sarah watched Storm's behavior carefully. Over the past few hours, she had learned to pay attention to what the dog was trying to communicate. "I think he wants us to follow him." "Follow him where?" "Maybe to Emma," Sarah said quietly. Detective Park looked skeptical. "Sarah, it's been 3 years. Even if Storm remembers her scent, the trail would be long cold by now." But Ryan was already standing up, clipping Storm's leash to his collar. "Storm has been acting strange for months. What if he's been picking up Emma's scent during our regular patrols? What if she's still in Durham?" The possibility sent a jolt of electricity through the room. If Emma was still alive, still in the area, then everything changed. This wasn't just about solving a cold case anymore. It was about saving a child who had been missing for 3 years. "We need to be careful," Park warned. "If Emma is still being held by whoever took her originally, and they realize we're closing in, they might panic. They might hurt her, or they might disappear with her entirely." Sarah checked her service weapon and grabbed her radio. "Then we better move fast." They left the police station in 2 cars, Ryan and Storm in the K-9 unit, followed by Sarah, Detective Park, and Sergeant Martinez in an unmarked sedan. Storm seemed to know exactly where he wanted to go, sitting alertly in the passenger seat and occasionally letting out a soft bark to direct Ryan's driving. They drove through residential neighborhoods, past schools and parks, past the places where normal families lived normal lives. Sarah couldn't help but think about Emma, about what she had been going through for the past 3 years, while everyone else assumed she was dead. Storm directed them to an industrial area on the outskirts of town, where old warehouses and abandoned buildings created a maze of shadows and hiding places. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty streets. "This doesn't look right," Martinez said into his radio. "If someone was holding a child, they'd want somewhere more isolated, more secure." But Storm was insistent, barking and scratching at the car window. Ryan pulled over near a chain-link fence that surrounded what looked like an old textile factory. "Storm's never been wrong before," Ryan said as they got out of the cars. "If he says Emma's here, then she's here." The factory had been closed for at least 5 years, but there were signs of recent activity: tire tracks in the dirt, footprints near the building, and a gap in the fence that had been repaired with new wire. Storm led them through the gap in the fence, his nose to the ground as he followed a scent trail only he could detect. The humans followed cautiously, their hands on their weapons, their eyes scanning for any signs of danger. The main building was 3 stories tall, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. But as they got closer, Sarah noticed something odd. Some of the windows on the second floor had been boarded up from the inside, and there was a faint light coming from behind the boards. "Someone's definitely using this place," Park whispered. Storm led them to a side entrance where the door had been left slightly ajar. Inside, they could hear the sound of machinery running, generators maybe, or ventilation systems. "This is it," Ryan said quietly. "This is where Storm's been trying to lead me." They entered the building slowly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air inside was stale and smelled of rust and decay, but there was something else too. The lingering scent of food, of people living in a space that wasn't meant for habitation. Storm's excitement was growing, his tail was wagging now, and he kept looking back at Ryan as if to say, "We're close, we're finally close." They climbed a set of metal stairs to the second floor, where the sound of the generators was louder. There were rooms here that had been converted into living spaces, mattresses on the floor, clothing hanging from makeshift lines, canned food stacked against the walls. But no people. The spaces felt recently abandoned, as if whoever had been living here had left in a hurry. Storm led them to the far end of the hallway, where a heavy wooden door was locked from the outside with multiple deadbolts. Ryan's heart began to pound as he realized what they had found. "Emma?" he called softly through the door. "Emma, are you in there?" There was a long moment of silence, and then a small voice answered from the other side of the door. "Who's there? Please don't hurt me." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. After 3 years, they had found her. Emma Rodriguez was alive. "Emma, my name is Ryan. I'm a police officer. I was there the night you were taken. Do you remember me?" Another pause. "The man with the dog?" "Yes, that's right. Storm is here with me. We've come to take you home." They could hear movement on the other side of the door, footsteps approaching slowly. "Storm?" Emma's voice was stronger now, filled with hope. "Is Storm really there?" Ryan unclipped Storm's leash, and the dog began scratching at the door, whimpering with excitement. "He remembers you too," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. "We never stopped looking for you, Emma. We never gave up." Detective Park was already working on the locks, using tools from her evidence kit to carefully open each deadbolt. The locks were sophisticated, the kind used to keep people from escaping rather than to keep intruders out. When the last lock clicked open, Ryan slowly pushed the door inward. The room beyond was larger than expected, with a small bed, a table and chairs, and even some toys scattered on the floor. It looked like someone had been trying to make it comfortable, but it was still a prison. Emma stood in the center of the room, and Sarah's heart broke at the sight of her. She was obviously older now, 8 instead of 5, but she was painfully thin, and her eyes held a wariness that no child should ever have to develop. Storm bounded into the room and went straight to Emma, who dropped to her knees and buried her face in the dog's fur. She was crying now, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered to Storm. "I knew you wouldn't forget me." Ryan knelt down beside them, and Emma looked up at him with eyes that were older than her years. "You came back," she said simply. "I'm so sorry it took so long," Ryan replied, his own tears flowing freely now. "I'm so sorry we left you that night." Emma shook her head. "The bad men said you weren't real police. They said you worked for them. But I knew they were lying because Storm was sad when we left." "What bad men, Emma? Detective Park asked gently. "Can you tell us about the people who kept you here?" Emma looked around the room nervously. "They said they'd hurt Storm if I ever told anyone about them. They said they had friends in the police who would make sure I never saw home again." Sarah felt a chill run through her. The corruption went deeper than they had realized. "Those men can't hurt you anymore," Sarah said, crouching down to Emma's level. "And they can't hurt Storm either. We're going to make sure you're safe." But even as she said the words, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were far from safety. If Emma's kidnappers had connections within the police department, then bringing her into protective custody might not be enough. The sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere else in the building, heavy boots on metal stairs, moving fast and purposeful. "We need to go," Martinez said urgently. "Now." As they prepared to leave the factory with Emma, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, who had been watching them? Who had known they were getting close to the truth? And most importantly, how far up did the corruption go? What Sarah discovered next would shake the very foundation of everything she believed about justice, and the people sworn to protect it. The footsteps were getting closer, echoing through the abandoned factory like a countdown to disaster. Detective Park grabbed Emma's hand, while Storm positioned himself protectively between the child and the doorway. Ryan drew his weapon, his training taking over, despite the emotional chaos of the reunion. "Is there another way out of here?" Sarah whispered to Emma. The 8-year-old nodded quickly. "There's a fire escape on the other side, but they watch it sometimes." "Who watches it?" Detective Park asked urgently. Before Emma could answer, a voice called out from the hallway, a voice that made Ryan's blood run cold. "Durham Police! Anyone in there?" It was Sergeant Williams, the same Sergeant Williams who had supposedly retired to Florida 2 years ago, the same man who had briefed Ryan about the fake federal operation 3 years earlier. Ryan's mind raced as pieces of a horrifying puzzle began falling into place. Williams hadn't retired. He had been part of the conspiracy from the beginning. He was one of the fake federal agents who had convinced Ryan to leave Emma behind that night. "This way," Emma whispered, tugging on Sarah's sleeve. She led them to a door hidden behind a makeshift curtain. It opened onto a narrow catwalk that connected to the building's fire escape. They moved as quietly as possible, but Storm's claws clicked on the metal grating. In the silence of the abandoned building, every sound seemed amplified. "I know you're in here," Williams called out, his voice closer now. "The girl needs to come with me. She's evidence in an ongoing federal investigation." Sarah felt sick. Even now, Williams was sticking to the same lies that had worked 3 years ago. But this time, they wouldn't fall for it. They reached the fire escape just as Williams and 2 other men entered the room where Emma had been held. Through the broken windows, Sarah could see them. Williams and 2 men in suits who looked exactly like the fake federal agents Ryan had described. "Empty," one of the suited men said, "but they were here recently. The bed's still warm." Williams cursed under his breath. "Check the other rooms. They couldn't have gotten far." Emma led them down the fire escape with the confidence of someone who had planned this escape route many times before. At the bottom, she pointed toward a drainage tunnel that led away from the factory. "I used to hide there when they brought visitors," she explained quietly. "Sometimes important people came to see me, and they didn't want me to hear what they were talking about." "Important people?" Detective Park asked as they crawled through the tunnel. "Men in expensive suits. They talked about money and politics and keeping secrets. One of them was a judge, I think. He wore those fancy black robes." Sarah and Park exchanged glances. If a judge was involved, the corruption went higher than they had imagined. This wasn't just about a few crooked cops. This was an organized conspiracy involving multiple levels of government. The tunnel led to a storm drain that emptied into a creek behind the factory. They emerged into the fading daylight, muddy and exhausted but alive. Storm shook the water from his fur and immediately began scanning the area for threats. "We need to get somewhere safe," Martinez said, checking his radio. "But if Williams is involved, we can't trust anyone at the department." Ryan looked down at Emma, who was holding Storm's collar like a lifeline. The dog had positioned himself beside her, alert and protective. After 3 years of separation, they had found each other again, but their reunion was far from over. "Emma," Ryan said gently, "I need you to tell me everything you remember about the people who kept you here. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, but her eyes kept darting around nervously. There were 3 main ones: the man who pretended to be a police sergeant, Williams, and 2 others who said they were federal agents. But I heard them talking once, and they weren't really agents. They worked for someone they called the Judge. "Did you ever see this judge?" Sarah asked. "Once. He came to check on me about 6 months ago. He was old, with white hair and a mean voice. He told the others that I was becoming a liability, that I knew too much." Detective Park pulled out her phone and showed Emma photos of local judges. "Do you recognize any of these men?" Emma studied the photos carefully, then pointed to one. "That's him, Judge Morrison. He said I was going to have to disappear permanently soon." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Judge Morrison was one of the most respected judges in the district, known for his tough stance on crime and his support for law enforcement. If he was involved in kidnapping and corruption, then the entire justice system in Durham was compromised. "We need evidence," Park said. "Emma's testimony is crucial, but we need more if we're going to take down someone like Morrison." "The room where they kept me," Emma said suddenly, "there's a hiding place behind the loose brick. I used to listen to their conversations and write down what I heard. I hid all the papers there." Ryan looked back toward the factory. Williams and his men were probably still searching the building, but those papers could contain the evidence they needed to expose the entire conspiracy. "It's too dangerous," Sarah said. "If we go back now, we're walking into a trap." But Storm had other ideas. The dog suddenly perked up, his ears focused on something in the distance. He let out a low bark and began moving back toward the factory. "What is it, boy?" Ryan asked. Storm looked back at them, then toward the factory, then back again. His message was clear. There was something important they needed to retrieve. "He knows about the papers," Emma said with certainty. "Storm was there when I hid them. He knows they're important." Against their better judgment, they decided to go back, but this time, they would be smart about it. Detective Park called for backup from the state police, giving them the factory's location and warning them about the corruption in the local department. "We'll create a distraction," she explained. "Draw Williams and his men away from the building while Emma and Storm retrieve the evidence." They split up. Park and Martinez circled around to the front of the factory to make noise and draw attention, while Ryan, Sarah, Emma, and Storm approached from the rear. The plan worked perfectly. Williams and his men rushed toward the sound of breaking glass and shouting voices, leaving the interior of the building temporarily unguarded. Emma led Storm and the officers back to her former prison. Behind a loose brick near the floor, she had created a small hiding space filled with dozens of folded papers covered in a child's handwriting. "I wrote down everything I could remember," she explained, as Sarah carefully collected the papers. "Names, dates, things they said about money and votes and making people disappear." Ryan scanned one of the papers, his eyes widening as he read Emma's careful notes. She had documented conversations about bribing politicians, about covering up crimes, about using the foster care system to traffic children to wealthy clients. "Emma, this is incredible," Sarah whispered. "You've been building a case against them for 3 years." "I knew someone would come for me eventually," Emma replied simply. "I wanted to make sure the bad people couldn't hurt anyone else." Storm stood guard at the door while they gathered the evidence. His ears were constantly moving, listening for any sign that Williams and his men were returning. As they prepared to leave, Emma suddenly grabbed Ryan's arm. "There's something else, something I never wrote down because it was too scary." "What is it?" "They have other children, not here, but in other places. Judge Morrison said they were expanding the operation to 3 more cities." The magnitude of what they had uncovered was staggering. This wasn't just about Emma. It was about a network of corruption and human trafficking that spanned multiple jurisdictions. They made it out of the factory just as the state police arrived. Williams and his fake federal agents were arrested attempting to flee the scene, and Emma's evidence papers were immediately turned over to the FBI. But their victory was short-lived. Within hours, news of the arrests had leaked to the media, and Emma's story became national headlines. The problem was that the publicity also alerted other members of the conspiracy that their operation had been exposed. "We need to get Emma somewhere safe," Sarah said as they sat in the state police station, surrounded by FBI agents and federal prosecutors. "If this network is as big as she says it is, they'll try to silence her." Emma sat quietly in a corner with Storm at her side, overwhelmed by all the attention, but comforted by the presence of her 4-legged friend. The dog hadn't left her side since their reunion, as if making up for 3 years of separation. FBI agent Jennifer Martinez, no relation to Sergeant Martinez, approached them with a grim expression. "We've verified several of the names and details in Emma's notes. This case is bigger than we initially thought. We're talking about a conspiracy that involves judges, politicians, law enforcement, and wealthy individuals in at least 4 states. What about the other children Emma mentioned? Ryan asked. We're launching simultaneous raids based on the locations she provided, but we need to move fast. Our sources suggest that the network is already beginning to shut down and relocate their operations. Over the next week, Emma worked closely with FBI agents and federal prosecutors to help them understand the full scope of the conspiracy. Her detailed notes, combined with Storm's ability to identify locations by scent, led to the discovery of 3 more hidden facilities where children were being held. The raids were successful. 12 more children were rescued, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Each had their own horror story, their own tale of being taken from their families and held captive by people who were supposed to protect them. Judge Morrison was arrested at his home, along with 2 other judges and several prominent politicians. The evidence against them was overwhelming, thanks largely to Emma's meticulous documentation over 3 years of captivity. But the conspiracy had tentacles that reached further than anyone had imagined. As the investigation expanded, it became clear that the network had been operating for over a decade, with hundreds of victims and millions of dollars in illegal profits. Emma was placed in protective custody with a foster family who had been thoroughly vetted by the FBI. Storm was officially reassigned to be her therapy dog, a decision that brought tears to Ryan's eyes when he heard about it. She saved herself, Ryan said to Sarah, as they watched Emma playing with Storm in the secure backyard of her new home. For 3 years, she gathered evidence and planned her escape. She's the bravest person I've ever met. Sarah nodded, but her expression was troubled. I keep thinking about all the times we could have found her sooner, all the signs we missed. Storm tried to tell us, Ryan replied. For months, he was trying to lead us to her. I was just too wrapped up in my own guilt to listen. The investigation continued for months, with new arrests and revelations almost every week. Emma testified before a grand jury, her voice strong and clear as she described her ordeal and the corruption she had witnessed. Storm sat beside her during her testimony, providing comfort and support. The sight of the small girl and the large dog working together to bring down a criminal empire captured the public's imagination and became a symbol of hope for other victims of trafficking. The media dubbed them the girl detective and her canine partner, but Emma preferred a simpler description. We're just friends who helped each other when we needed it most. Ryan was cleared of any wrongdoing in the original incident, and his decision to keep Emma's shoe was ultimately viewed as the action that led to breaking open the case. He was commended for his persistence and his willingness to trust Storm's instincts. Sarah was promoted to detective and assigned to the newly formed Human Trafficking Task Force. Her first case was investigating reports of a similar network operating in Atlanta based on information provided by one of the rescued children. As the first year after Emma's rescue came to an end, the full scope of the conspiracy was still being unraveled. Over 200 people had been arrested, including judges, politicians, law enforcement officers, and wealthy individuals who had participated in the trafficking network. But for Emma, the most important victory was much simpler. She was going to school, making friends, and slowly learning to trust the world again. And every morning when she woke up, Storm was there beside her bed, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring. The dog who had refused to give up on a missing child had not only saved her life, he had exposed a conspiracy that had destroyed hundreds of families and corrupted the very institutions meant to protect them. Emma's story became a testament to the power of hope, the importance of listening to those who cannot speak for themselves, and the unbreakable bond between a girl and her dog who never forgot each other. The prosecution of Judge Morrison was about to begin, and Emma would finally face the man who had stolen 3 years of her childhood. But she wouldn't face him alone. Storm would be right there beside her, just as he had been on that terrible night when their paths first crossed. The investigation had revealed that Emma wasn't the only child who had been specifically targeted because of what she had witnessed. There were others, still missing, still waiting for someone to find them. And with Emma's help, the search was just beginning. What no one knew was that Judge Morrison had one final card to play, a secret that would either destroy Emma's credibility forever or expose an even darker truth about the people in power. The biggest shock was yet to come. 2 weeks before Judge Morrison's trial was set to begin, Emma woke up screaming. It was 3 a.m., and Storm immediately jumped onto her bed, pressing his warm body against her trembling form. The nightmares had been getting worse as the trial date approached, but this one was different. This one felt like a memory, trying to break through 3 years of carefully constructed mental barriers. "Storm," she whispered into his fur, "I think I remember something important, something they made me forget." The next morning, Dr. Rebecca Torres, Emma's therapist, sat across from her in the FBI's secure facility. Storm lay at Emma's feet, his dark eyes never leaving her face. He had become incredibly protective of Emma in recent weeks, sensing her increasing anxiety about testifying against the people who had destroyed her childhood. "Emma, you mentioned that you think you've recovered a memory," Dr. Torres said gently. "Can you tell me about it?" Emma fidgeted with Storm's ear, using the familiar motion to calm herself. "In my dream, I was younger, maybe 4 years old. I was at my grandmother's house, but there were other people there too, important people. They were having a party or something. Do you remember any faces? Judge Morrison was there, but he looked different, friendlier. He gave me candy and told me I was a special little girl." Emma's voice grew quieter. "There was a man with a camera. He was taking pictures of all the children at the party." Dr. Torres leaned forward slightly. "Emma, this is very important. Do you remember if this happened before or after you disappeared from your grandmother's house?" "Before. Maybe a year before. But here's the weird part. I think my grandmother knew these people. She was talking to them like they were old friends." The implications of what Emma was saying sent chills through everyone in the room. If Judge Morrison had been in contact with Emma and her family before her kidnapping, it suggested that her abduction hadn't been random at all. She had been specifically targeted, groomed, and then taken. FBI agent Jennifer Martinez immediately contacted Emma's grandmother, Rosa Rodriguez, who had been Emma's legal guardian since her parents died in a car accident when she was 3. Rosa had been devastated by Emma's disappearance and had spent 3 years believing her granddaughter was dead. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Agent Martinez said during the phone interview, "Emma has recovered some memories about a party at your house. Do you remember hosting any gatherings where Judge Morrison was present?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Rosa finally spoke, her voice was shaky. I can't talk about this over the phone. Can you come here?" Rosa lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Durham, surrounded by photos of Emma at various ages. When the FBI agents arrived, she was sitting at her kitchen table with her hands folded, looking like she had aged 10 years since Emma's rescue. "I've been carrying this secret for 4 years, Rosa said without preamble. "I was too ashamed to tell anyone, even after Emma disappeared." Agent Martinez sat down across from her. "What secret, Mrs. Rodriguez?" "The parties. Judge Morrison used to host these gatherings. He said they were charity events for underprivileged children. He would invite families like ours, single grandparents, foster families, people who were struggling financially." "And you attended these parties?" Rosa nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "He was so kind, so generous. He would give us money, help with Emma's school expenses, buy her clothes and toys. I thought he was just a good man who wanted to help children. But something changed your mind?" "The last party we went to, Emma was acting strange afterward. She was having nightmares, didn't want to be left alone. When I asked her what was wrong, she said the man with the camera had asked her to pose for special pictures." Agent Martinez felt her stomach turn. "Did you report this to anyone?" "I tried to call Judge Morrison to ask about it, but his secretary said he was too busy to speak with me. Then, a few weeks later, Emma disappeared from my backyard." Rosa broke down completely. "I always wondered if there was a connection, but who was going to believe me? He was a respected judge, and I was just a poor woman from the wrong side of town." The FBI immediately launched an investigation into Judge Morrison's charity events. What they found was a sophisticated operation that had been running for over a decade. Morrison had been using his position and reputation to identify vulnerable children, gain their families' trust, and then gradually move these children into situations where they could be exploited. Emma's case wasn't unique. She was one of dozens of children who had been taken after attending Morrison's parties. The judge had been running a cataloging system, essentially shopping for children who fit specific criteria requested by wealthy clients. But the most disturbing discovery came when agents searched Morrison's home office. Hidden behind a false wall, they found thousands of photographs and videos documenting years of abuse. The evidence was so overwhelming that Morrison's lawyers immediately began discussing a plea bargain. Emma was in her new bedroom, helping Storm with his evening routine of checking all the doors and windows before bedtime, when Agent Martinez arrived with the news. "Emma, we need to talk to you about Judge Morrison," the agent said gently. Emma looked up from brushing Storm's coat. "Did he confess?" "In a way, yes, but he's also making some claims about your grandmother that we need to verify." "What kind of claims?" Agent Martinez hesitated. "He says that your grandmother knew about the trafficking operation. He claims she was paid to bring you to the parties and that she agreed to let you be taken in exchange for money." Emma's hands stopped moving. Storm immediately sensed her distress and pressed closer to her. "That's not true," she said firmly. "My grandmother loves me. She would never sell me." "We believe you, Emma, but Morrison is trying to use this as part of his defense strategy. He's claiming that families like yours were willing participants in the trafficking operation." Emma's new foster mother, Maria Santos, had been listening from the doorway. She stepped into the room, her face flushed with anger. "That's disgusting. He's trying to blame his victims." "Unfortunately, it's a common defense tactic," Agent Martinez explained. "Traffickers often try to shift blame onto the families, especially in cases involving poverty or desperation." Emma stood up abruptly, causing Storm to jump to his feet as well. "I want to see the videos." "Emma, that's not a good idea. The content is very disturbing and—" "I need to see them," Emma interrupted. "If Morrison is lying about my grandmother, then the videos will prove it. I was there. I remember what happened." Dr. Torres was called in to help make the decision. After a long discussion with Emma, her foster family, and the FBI team, they agreed to let her view selected portions of the evidence. The viewing would take place in a controlled environment with full psychological support. The next day, Emma sat in a secure FBI conference room with Storm beside her, Dr. Torres on her other side, and Agent Martinez operating the video equipment. They had chosen 3 videos that showed Emma at different ages, hoping to establish a timeline and verify her memories. The first video showed Emma at age 4, at what appeared to be a birthday party. She was laughing and playing with other children, while adults mingled in the background. Judge Morrison could be seen talking to Rosa, but their conversation appeared normal and friendly. "That's the party I remembered," Emma said quietly. "Look, there's my grandmother talking to him. She doesn't look scared or like she's making a deal. She just looks grateful." The second video was more disturbing. Emma was 5 years old, and the setting had changed from a party atmosphere to something more clinical. She was being photographed individually, and her body language showed clear discomfort and confusion. "I remember this," Emma said, her voice harder now. "This was the last party before I was taken. My grandmother wasn't there. They told me she had dropped me off and would pick me up later, but she never came." The third video was the most damning. It showed Judge Morrison giving instructions to his associates about Emma's placement with a family in another state. The conversation made it clear that Emma had been sold to buyers who had specific requests for a child matching her description. "My grandmother isn't in this video at all," Emma observed. "Morrison is talking about me like I'm property, but there's no evidence that my grandmother agreed to any of this." Agent Martinez paused the video. "Emma, you're absolutely right. These videos actually support your grandmother's story. It appears that Morrison used his initial charity relationship with your family to gain access to you, but the actual trafficking operation happened without your grandmother's knowledge or consent." Emma leaned against Storm, who had been watching her carefully throughout the viewing. "My grandmother was tricked, just like I was. Morrison used her trust against both of us." The evidence from the videos, combined with Emma's recovered memories and Rosa's testimony, completely dismantled Morrison's defense strategy. His lawyers advised him to accept a plea bargain, but the judge refused, insisting on going to trial. "He thinks he can still win," Agent Martinez told Emma during one of their preparation sessions. "Morrison believes that his reputation and connections will protect him, even with all the evidence against him." Emma was practicing her testimony with Dr. Torres when Storm suddenly stood up and walked to the window. His ears were perked, and he was growling softly at something outside. "What is it, boy?" Emma asked, joining him at the window. In the parking lot below, a black sedan was parked with its engine running. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside, but Storm's reaction suggested that whoever it was meant trouble. Agent Martinez was called immediately, and within minutes the building was surrounded by additional security. The sedan sped away before it could be stopped, but its license plate was traced to a rental car company. The person who had rented it used a fake ID, but security cameras at the rental office showed a man who matched the description of one of Morrison's former associates, someone who had not yet been arrested. "They're trying to intimidate Emma," Maria Santos said angrily. "They want her to be too scared to testify." But they had underestimated both Emma and Storm. The dog's protective instincts had grown even stronger since their reunion, and Emma's determination to see justice done had only increased with each new revelation about the scope of Morrison's crimes. "I'm not backing down," Emma announced during an emergency meeting with the FBI team. "If I don't testify, Morrison might go free, and other children will suffer. Storm and I have come this far together. We're not stopping now." The trial began 3 weeks later, in a courthouse that had been transformed into a fortress. Security was unprecedented, with federal marshals, FBI agents, and local police working together to ensure Emma's safety. Storm had been officially designated as her emotional support animal, allowing him to accompany her into the courtroom. Judge Morrison entered the courtroom in shackles, a dramatic fall from grace for a man who had once wielded enormous power within the same building. He looked older, smaller somehow, but his eyes still held the cold calculation that had allowed him to destroy so many lives. Emma's testimony was scheduled for the second day of the trial. She spent the evening before reviewing her notes with Dr. Torres and Agent Martinez, with Storm lying across her feet under the table. "Remember," Dr. Torres said, "you only need to tell the truth. You've been incredibly brave, and you've already done the hard work of surviving and gathering evidence. Tomorrow is just about sharing your story." Emma nodded, but her hands were shaking slightly as she petted Storm's head. "What if the defense lawyer tries to make me look like a liar? What if they try to say I made everything up? Then Storm and I will be right there to remind you that you're the strongest person any of us have ever met," Agent Martinez replied. "You survived 3 years of captivity, documented evidence that brought down a criminal empire, and led us to 12 other children who needed help. No lawyer can take that away from you." That night, Emma had another dream. But this time, it wasn't a nightmare. She dreamed about all the children who had been rescued because of her courage. She saw them in new homes, safe and loved, with their own dogs and cats and families who would never let them be hurt again. When she woke up, Storm was already awake, watching her with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand everything she was feeling. "Today's the day, isn't it?" she whispered to him. Storm's tail wagged once, gently, as if he was saying, "We've got this." The courthouse was packed with reporters, law enforcement officials, and family members of victims. Emma entered through a side door, with Storm at her side, and a phalanx of federal agents surrounding them. She wore a simple blue dress and had pulled her hair back in a ponytail, looking every bit the 11-year-old girl she now was. When the bailiff called her name, Emma stood up with Storm beside her and walked to the witness stand. The courtroom fell completely silent as she was sworn in, her small voice carrying clearly as she promised to tell the truth. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor said gently. "My name is Emma Rodriguez," she replied, her voice growing stronger, "and this is Storm. We're here to tell you about the bad things that Judge Morrison did to me and other children." Judge Morrison stared at her from the defendant's table, his expression unreadable, but Emma didn't look away. She had Storm beside her, and she had the truth. That was all she needed. As Emma began to tell her story, several jurors were already reaching for tissues. This wasn't just a testimony. It was the account of a child who had refused to be broken, who had turned her captivity into an opportunity to build a case against her captors. But Morrison's defense attorney was preparing a surprise that no one saw coming. Hidden in his briefcase was evidence that would reveal the final, most shocking truth about Emma's kidnapping. A truth that would either vindicate her completely or destroy everything she had fought for. The most explosive moment of the trial was about to unfold, and Emma had no idea that the man she thought was her enemy was about to become the key to unlocking an even bigger conspiracy than anyone had imagined. Emma had been testifying for 2 hours, her voice never wavering, as she described the 3 years of captivity and the evidence she had gathered. Storm lay quietly beside the witness stand, occasionally lifting his head when Emma's voice grew emotional, providing the silent support that had carried her through the darkest moments of her life. The prosecutor was nearing the end of his questioning when Morrison's defense attorney, Robert Blackwood, stood up with an objection. "Your Honor," Blackwood said, his voice carrying an odd mix of resignation and determination. "Before cross-examination begins, I need to present some evidence that has just come to my attention. Evidence that completely changes the nature of this case." Judge Patricia Stern, who was presiding over the trial, looked surprised. "Mr. Blackwood, this is highly irregular. What kind of evidence?" Blackwood reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. "Audio recordings, Your Honor. Conversations between my client and his handlers, recorded without his knowledge over the past 5 years." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even Morrison looked shocked, his face pale as he stared at his own attorney. "Handlers?" Judge Stern asked. "Mr. Blackwood, please explain." Blackwood took a deep breath. "Your Honor, my client is not the mastermind of this trafficking operation. He's a victim of blackmail who has been forced to participate in these crimes under threat of death. These recordings will prove that Judge Morrison has been trying to find a way to expose the real criminals for years." Emma felt the world tilt around her. Storm immediately sensed her distress and pressed closer to her leg. This couldn't be true. Morrison was the villain, the man who had stolen her childhood. He couldn't be a victim too. "I object to this entire line of," the prosecutor began, but Judge Stern held up her hand. "I'll allow the evidence to be presented, but Mr. Blackwood, this better not be a stunt. If you're attempting to manufacture a defense at the last minute, there will be serious consequences." Blackwood activated a small recording device. The voice that filled the courtroom was Morrison's, but he sounded terrified, desperate. "Please, you have to understand," Morrison's recorded voice pleaded. "I never wanted any part of this. When you showed me those photos of my daughter, when you threatened to hurt my grandchildren, what choice did I have?" A second voice responded, mechanically distorted to hide the speaker's identity. "You made your choice 15 years ago when you took our money to fix those cases. Now, you do what we tell you, or everyone you love disappears, starting with that little girl you're so worried about protecting." Emma's hands were shaking now. She looked at Morrison across the courtroom, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. Not cruelty, but fear. Deep, bone-crushing fear. Blackwood played more recordings. In each one, Morrison was being given instructions about which children to target, which families to approach, which cases to manipulate. But in every recording, he was also arguing, trying to find alternatives, begging for the children to be spared. "There has to be another way," Morrison's voice said in one clip. "Emma Rodriguez is just a baby. She doesn't deserve this." "She's perfect for the Atlanta client," the distorted voice replied. 5 years old, dark hair, no close family except the grandmother. Make it happen, or we release the photos of what you did to get your judgeship." Emma felt sick. Morrison hadn't chosen her because he was evil. He had been forced to choose her to protect other people he loved. The prosecutor requested a recess, and Emma was escorted to a private room with Storm, Dr. Torres, and Agent Martinez. She sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she had just heard. "This changes everything," Agent Martinez said quietly. "If Morrison was being blackmailed, then we're dealing with an even larger criminal organization than we thought." "But he still hurt children," Emma said, her voice small and confused. "He still let them take me." Dr. Torres knelt down beside Emma's chair. "You're right, Emma. Even if Morrison was being forced to participate, he still made choices that hurt you and other children. The question now is whether those choices make him a criminal or another victim." Storm had positioned himself between Emma and the door, his instincts telling him that danger was still present, even though they were in a secure room. The dog's anxiety was feeding into Emma's own emotional turmoil. When court resumed, Blackwood continued presenting evidence that painted Morrison as a trapped man who had been systematically manipulated and controlled by a shadow organization. Phone records showed that Morrison had attempted to contact FBI field offices multiple times over the years, only to be told that his calls were being transferred to agents who never called him back. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Blackwood said during his opening statement, "my client is guilty of terrible crimes, but he is not the architect of those crimes. For 15 years, Judge Morrison has been a prisoner in his own life, forced to participate in horrific acts while secretly trying to gather evidence to bring down the real criminals." The prosecutor stood up for his rebuttal. Even if everything Mr. Blackwood claims is true, Judge Morrison still had choices. He could have gone to the media, he could have resigned from the bench, he could have refused to participate regardless of the consequences to himself. Emma watched this legal battle unfold, feeling like she was caught between two truths that couldn't coexist. Morrison had hurt her, but maybe he had also been trying to protect her in the only way he could. The answer came in the form of Morrison himself taking the witness stand. He looked directly at Emma as he was sworn in, and she could see tears in his eyes. Storm growled softly, still protective, but the sound was more confused than aggressive. "Mr. Morrison," Blackwood began, "please tell the court how you first became involved with the organization that has controlled your life for the past 15 years. Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. I was a young prosecutor, trying to make a name for myself. I was offered a judgeship, but the appointment required certain considerations. I was told that occasionally I would need to show leniency to specific defendants, or dismiss cases that were inconvenient to certain powerful people. And you agreed? I was young and ambitious. I thought it was just politics the way the system worked. I had no idea what I was really signing up for. When did you realize the true nature of the organization? Morrison closed his eyes. 5 years into my judgeship, they came to me with the first request involving a child. They wanted me to dismiss charges against a man who had been trafficking minors. When I refused, they showed me photographs. What kind of photographs? Pictures of my own daughter at her school, my wife at the grocery store, my elderly mother at her doctor's appointment. They made it clear that my family's safety depended on my cooperation. Emma felt her anger wavering. She had spent 3 years hating Morrison, but now she was beginning to understand that he might have been as trapped as she was. Tell the court about Emma Rodriguez, Blackwood said gently. Morrison looked directly at Emma again, and this time she didn't look away. Emma was the 7th child I was forced to help them acquire. By then, I had been trying for years to find a way to expose the organization without getting my family killed. I thought if I could gather enough evidence, if I could document their operations while participating in them, I might eventually be able to bring them all down. Is that why you insisted on being present during Emma's captivity? Emma's eyes widened. Morrison had been present during her captivity? She didn't remember seeing him after that first night. I visited Emma regularly, Morrison continued, his voice breaking. I told the organization that I needed to check on their assets personally, but really I was trying to make sure she was being treated as well as possible under the circumstances. I brought her books, better food, medical care when she was sick. Emma's mind raced back through her memories. The anonymous deliveries of new clothes and books, the times when her captors would suddenly become less cruel for no apparent reason. The medical visits that she had assumed were just to keep her healthy for sale. I also helped her develop her documentation system, Morrison said. I couldn't free her without destroying my family, but I could help her gather evidence that would eventually bring everyone down. You taught Emma to take notes on her captors? I gave her the notebooks and pens. I taught her what details were important to record. I knew that if she could document everything she saw and heard, it would eventually lead to the arrest of the real criminals. Emma felt like her entire understanding of the past 3 years was crumbling and rebuilding itself. Morrison hadn't just been her captor. He had been her secret ally, working within the system to help her gather the evidence that would eventually free her. Storm seemed to sense Emma's confusion. The dog stood up and walked closer to the witness stand, studying Morrison with intense concentration. After a long moment, Storm's tail wagged once, slowly, as if he was remembering something good about this man. How did you know that Storm would eventually lead authorities to Emma? The prosecutor asked during cross-examination. Morrison smiled sadly. I didn't know for certain, but I hoped. Dogs never forget, especially police dogs. I knew that Storm had bonded with Emma during that first night, and I knew that Officer Mitchell carried Emma's shoe as a reminder. I just had to hope that eventually Storm would find a way to communicate what he knew. But you could have ended Emma's suffering at any time by simply confessing your involvement to the authorities. And condemn not only my family to death, but Emma as well, Morrison replied firmly. The organization doesn't leave loose ends. If I had confessed before we had enough evidence to arrest the leadership, Emma would have disappeared permanently, along with all the other children in their custody. The trial continued for 3 more days, with testimony from FBI agents, other victims, and experts in organized crime. The picture that emerged was of a vast criminal network that used blackmail and intimidation to control judges, politicians, and law enforcement officials across multiple states. Morrison was both perpetrator and victim, a man who had made terrible choices, but had also worked within an impossible situation to minimize harm and gather evidence for eventual justice. On the final day of testimony, Emma was called back to the witness stand. This time, she had a different story to tell. "I want to change some of my testimony," she said clearly. "I said that Judge Morrison was one of the bad people who hurt me. That's not entirely true." The courtroom was completely silent. Even Storm seemed to be holding his breath. "Judge Morrison did hurt me by helping to take me away from my grandmother," Emma continued. "But while I was being held captive, someone was secretly helping me. Someone made sure I had warm clothes and good food. Someone left me books and notebooks. Someone taught me how to be strong and how to gather evidence." She looked directly at Morrison. "I didn't know it was you until now, but I think you were trying to save me in the only way you could." Morrison was crying openly now, and several jurors were wiping their eyes. "I forgive you," Emma said simply, "and I want to help you catch the real bad people." The verdict came back 3 days later. Morrison was found guilty of participating in the trafficking operation, but was given a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation in bringing down the larger network. More importantly, the evidence he had helped Emma gather led to arrests in 6 states and the rescue of over 40 more children. Emma's story became national news, not just because of her incredible survival and bravery, but because of her ability to forgive and see the humanity in someone who had both harmed and helped her. Storm became something of a celebrity as well, proving that sometimes the most important witnesses have 4 legs and a tail. His instinctive understanding of the truth had set in motion a chain of events that brought down one of the largest child trafficking networks in U.S. history. But Emma's real victory came 6 months after the trial ended. She was in the backyard of her foster home, throwing a tennis ball for Storm, when Agent Martinez arrived with news that would complete her healing journey. "Emma," Agent Martinez said, sitting down on the porch steps, "we found something that belongs to you." She handed Emma a small suitcase that had been recovered from one of the raided facilities. Inside were photo albums, baby clothes, toys, and mementos from Emma's life before her kidnapping, items that her grandmother had lost and mourned for years. "Your grandmother wants to see you," Agent Martinez continued. "She's been cleared of any wrongdoing, and if you want, she'd like to be part of your life again." Emma hugged the suitcase to her chest, tears of joy streaming down her face. Storm bounded over and put his paws on her shoulders, as if celebrating the return of these precious memories. The reunion with her grandmother took place the following week. Rosa Rodriguez was older, grayer, marked by years of grief and guilt. But when she saw Emma running toward her with Storm at her side, she looked young again. "Mija," Rosa whispered as she held Emma tight, "I never stopped believing you would come home." Emma pulled back to look at her grandmother's face. "I know, Abuela, and I know you didn't sell me. Judge Morrison told me the truth about what really happened." The extended Rodriguez family began to heal together. Emma continued living with her foster family, but spent weekends and holidays with Rosa, slowly rebuilding the relationship that had been stolen from them both. Storm had officially retired from police work and became Emma's full-time companion and therapy dog. The bond between them had only grown stronger through their shared trauma and triumph. A year after the trial, Emma published a book about her experience, with all proceeds going to organizations that helped trafficked children. The book, titled Storm's Promise, became a bestseller and helped raise awareness about the signs of child trafficking. Emma had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending that bad things hadn't happened. Healing was about understanding the full truth, finding forgiveness where it was deserved, and using her experience to help others who were still trapped in darkness. Judge Morrison served 4 years in federal prison and then dedicated the rest of his life to working with anti-trafficking organizations. He and Emma maintained a correspondence, helping each other heal from the roles they had been forced to play in a system designed to destroy them both. Storm lived to be 14 years old, spending his golden years as Emma's constant companion and protector. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, Emma held him close and whispered the same words she had said to him during their darkest moments together. "Thank you for never giving up on me." Emma kept Storm's collar and the pink shoe that had started everything. They sat together on her bookshelf, reminders of the dog who had refused to let her be forgotten, and the journey that had taught her the true meaning of courage, forgiveness, and hope. Years later, as a successful advocate for trafficked children, Emma would often tell people that her real rescue hadn't come from law enforcement or the courts. It had come from a loyal dog who remembered her scent, and a community of people who refused to give up on the truth, no matter how complex or painful it might be. The story of Emma and Storm became a testament to the power of loyalty, the importance of listening to those who cannot speak for themselves, and the possibility of finding light even in the darkest corners of human experience. But the most important lesson Emma learned was that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry badges. Sometimes they have 4 legs, a wet nose, and the unshakable belief that love is stronger than fear. If you've been following Emma and Storm's incredible journey, you know that their bond changed everything. But which moment do you think was the real turning point that saved them both? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove love and loyalty can overcome even the darkest circumstances.